Hello, all, and welcome to Bennis Stories, a series of interviews with people who knew, loved, were influenced by, worked with, wrote with, were students and mentees of Warren Bennis. This is Kate Bennis, Warren's daughter. This series is created for the Warren Bennis Leadership Institute at the University of Cincinnati's Lindner College of Business. My partner in this endeavor is Betsy Myers. Betsy was a dear friend and colleague of Dad's, worked with him at the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government as its executive director. She has also been a senior advisor to both President Clinton and President Obama and is a senior advisor to the Warren Bennis Leadership Institute. Today, Betsy and I are delighted to welcome Bill George. Bill is an executive fellow at Harvard Business School, where he was a professor of management practice and senior fellow teaching leadership from 2004 to 2022. He is the former chairman and chief executive officer of Medtronic. He was a senior executive at Honeywell and Litton Industries and served in the U.S. Department of Defense. Bill is the author of True North, Emerging Leader Edition, and True North Field Book, Emerging Leader Edition, Discover Your True North, the Discover Your True North Field Book, Authentic Leadership, True North and Finding Your True North, 7 Lessons for Leading in Crisis, and True North Groups. He was named one of the top 25 business leaders of the past 25 years by PBS, Executive of the Year by the Academy of Management, and Director of the Year by the National Association of Corporate Directors. Bill is a frequent contributor to CNBC, Fortune Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal, and makes frequent appearances on television and radio. Welcome, Bill. We're so glad to have you.
I love your father. Loved him. Loved, still love. One of the saddest days of my life is when his assistant called to say he died, because I was shocked that it happened so quickly.
I know.
And we had been with him the previous spring in USC, and he'd asked us to come out, and Penny and me, he always included Penny, to teach the second last class he ever taught. And he could barely speak, but it was wonderful. And you could see the students just held him in awe. It was like you're dealing with, a godlike figure. Like some people deal with the Dalai Lama, like he just held him in awe. And then we had dinner that night. And I'm trying to, the phrase he used that night over dinner, I want to make sure I get it right, but I think was, Penny asked him, "What do you want on your tombstone?" Anyway, I think he said gracious friend.
Yeah. He used to always say generous company.
Maybe it was generous friend.
But gracious friend is nice too.
Yeah. And so that was quite special and such a wonderful human being. And he was, by the way, incredibly good to me. I'm not sure we had met. We may have met, but I didn't know him. He and David Gergen were doing a seminar at the Aspen Institute in July of 2002. It was called Leadership and Character, the two of them. And I said, Penny, we have to go to this. So we went to the Aspen Institute and we were with them for a week. And we got quite close to both of them. And then Warren, somehow out of the blue, I was struggling then. I had written a first book that never got published after my experience at Medtronic. I couldn't find a publisher, and it was probably too much about me. It was called Creating Miracles Every 10 Seconds, the story of Medtronic and me. It was too specific for the publishers. And I had an editor with somebody who did not take the book, with a large, big name, Random House it was, Executive Vice President Random House, that said, well, I like the last chapter called Authentic Leadership. And he said, I think you ought to write a book around that. And I said, I have no standing in leadership. I'm no Warren Bennis, so I could never write a book on leadership. Well, give it a shot. So then I did. And I actually turned it around and made that the whole book. That was my 2003 book. And that was in the summer of 2002. And I was still struggling to find a publisher because the people at Random House had just turned me down a week before. And Warren said, oh, I'd like to have you become part of the Warren Bennis series at Josie Bass, and which he then made a call. He said, call this woman, Susan Williams, who's a wonderful person, the editor. And so that all happened, and it's got me started. But I think somehow, and this is a little egotistical of me to say, but he adopted me as a mentee. And because I didn't ask him, he adopted me. And I think he wanted someone to take and carry out his ideas and push them further. And I had read his book in 1989. I read from the time I was 7 years old, I read all kinds of leadership books. And the business leadership books never made any sense to me. like Michael Maccabee's book, The Gamesman. Well, I couldn't find myself. I kept trying to find myself in these books as part of my own development. I couldn't find anything. So the first book I ever read that made any sense to me was Warren's On Becoming a Leader. And that became like a Bible for me. It was just like perfect. It's all there. I read Geeks and Geezers. I read his other books, but that was the one that really was definitive for me, that really was transformative. And that was the same time that I went to Medtronic. So it was exactly when I joined Medtronic, left Honeywell. And that made a lot of sense. And his ideas on leadership made great sense to me. And it was just a wonderful relationship. And I feel so blessed that he would do that for me. I still wonder why, because I'm not an academic. There are tons of academics out there he's worked with. And if you go back to my book, Discover Your True North, I wrote that special introduction or preface on him. But he really was and is the father of leadership. Peter Drucker was great on management. It was Warren who was the father of leadership. They really understood leadership, the first one, honestly. There are a lot of scholars and there are a lot of psychologists who've done really good work. Eric Erickson, for example. These people have done really good work, but they weren't leadership scholars per se.
Right.
But they were really good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not taking anything away from them. And even some of the ideas that came along, like Theory Y and this, were interesting ideas. Well-known books like Tom Peters were breakthrough books of their time, and they were all focused on corporations, just like Jim Collins's book, From Good to Great. He's not focusing on leaders. He's focusing on good to great. He's not telling people how to become the kind of leader you want to become. And so Warren's books were the first ones that had made sense to me. And then he helped me get Authentic Leadership published. It became a modest bestseller, and it did well. And I went on then. Actually, I rented his apartment. What happened is I came to Harvard at a time when he was there. They gave him some title like research fellow or something. And he was teaching some and working there. And he had a little apartment over in Cambridge, right off of Mount Auburn.
Yeah.
Right down from Darwin's.
Yes.
And so then at that point in time, for health reasons, I believe it's for health reasons, he had to move back to Southern California. You guys know the story better than I. And so then he left Harvard Business School and went back to Southern California. So he was kind enough to lease his apartment to me. So we took over his apartment lease in Cambridge, and we spent our first semester there. So I came there exactly 20 years ago this week, January 4th, 2004, and started teaching, just plunged in, started teaching at 3 classes the first week. It's crazy. But,
3 classes.
the apartment was very small, and Penny was living with me to kind of support me rather than being back in Minnesota. And then she used to come over, try to get a computer. She would come over to the student center, the Spangler Center, and sit there and meet students and do things. And while I was off teaching. So that's what we lived for.
Was that your first experience teaching?
I'd never taught before. Well, no, it wasn't my first. Let me take that back. No, it wasn't my first experience. When I left Medtronic, I have a philosophy that when you leave as CEO and you've done well, you have to get way out of your successor's hair. And so I didn't even want to live and have an office a block from Lake of the Isles. My home is right on Lake of the Isles. And I didn't even want to walk around the lake and see people saying, "Oh, Bill, culture of Medtronic's not the same since you left." So I went to Switzerland. I kicked around trying to say what I was going to do for 8 months. From May, when I gave up the CEO job, I was still chair of the board until March. And I'd been offered a joint appointment with 2 leading Swiss institutions. The EPFL, it's called, the École Polytechnique Lausanne, okay? Federal Lausanne. And then it's the counterpart to ETH. And then also IMD, the business school, Institute for Management Development. And so I had a joint appointment, and that was where I really plunged into teaching for the first time. And it was a great experience. I loved it. I found out I loved it. Being 7 time zones away from Minnesota didn't work well for Penny. Her work with integrative health was ramping up at that time and running our foundation. And she created an organization called Bravewell of 25 foundations around the country. So she needed more time back there. So it didn't work as well for her. And when I stayed over in 2003, I was there for about 6 months, and then she didn't come over that year. So just for her father passed away and also some other reasons. But the point was, that was my first experience teaching. Then I got thrown into it. And then Kim Clark, Dean of Harvard Business School, asked me to come teach there. So I've just been teaching there for 20 years. I'm no longer part of the faculty, but I've been teaching there for 20 years. Warren helped me get Authentic Leadership published. And then the first class I walked into, well, first faculty meeting I walked into and said hello to Kim Clark, thanked him for including me. He said, "Now, Bill, I read your book," meaning Authentic Leadership, "and I really liked it. You wrote a book about yourself. Now you have to write a book about other leaders." So I then, after getting set up and teaching, I then formed a little team with an MBA from Stanford that I hired as to work for me, named Peter Sims, and a colleague who just had showed up and wanted to work on this. I'm excited about it. Not an academic at all. And the three of us went out and interviewed 125 leaders. Yeoman like task. We had 3,000 pages of transcript. It was a lot of work. And I had a research assistant, Blaine, who brought all this together for us. So then when we were starting to formulate our ideas, and I agreed with Peter Sims, rightly or wrongly, perhaps wrongly in retrospect, to say that he was not a co-author, but I would say put his name on the cover and say Bill George with Peter Sims, which I did. And then so Peter and I spent a whole week in Santa Monica with Warren.
Oh,
And as we were, before we started writing, but as we had ideas together, and we pulled together this, Peter pulled together this incredible amount of transcript information and sorted through it for me. I couldn't have done it without him. He did a great job of that. So we sat with Warren in his condo, Kate, in Santa Monica, and every morning we would go around 9 o'clock. And we stayed over at the, not at Shutters, right? Just was staying there a few days ago, but the place next to it, Casa, something or other, has a Latinx name. And we'd go walk over to Warren's condo, and we'd be there from like 9 to 1. And he never wrote a word, but he reviewed all the ideas. And then we would go through chapter by chapter and talk about ideas. For example, when we got to chapter 1, life stories, we had a meeting out in Colorado that summer. And with all these transcripts, I was afraid we had nothing but mush, because my academic colleagues at Harvard said, "Bill, you've got to find the characteristics of successful leaders through your work." And that meant statistically. And what are the traits and characteristics of successful leaders? Well, that never made any sense to me, but I tried to take a look at that. And my research assistant found there were 1,400 studies done on the characteristics of successful leaders. Not one had ever proved valid, nor could it be repeated. So they weren't really, they were just ideas.
wow.
And so we realized it wasn't that. It was about your life story, who you are.
Yeah.
And then Warren had talked about crucibles and geeks and geezers. So I appropriated his ideas and gave him credit, but still I appropriated his ideas and turned that into a major chapter. So I remember when we got to the life stories, and we used Howard Schultz as our role model, because I'd interviewed Howard. What I'm trying to say is that Warren, I remember, said to me, he had such amazing knowledge of culture and leader and literature. It was amazing. And Shakespeare. So he'd give us ideas from Shakespeare. And one in particular stuck in my mind. There was a novelist named John Barth, B-A-R-T-H. And he said, "Now, John Barth said, the story of your life is not your life, it is your story." Wow. And so we incorporated that as a lead idea in there. What is the story of your life, and how do you frame that to really understand your life story at a deeper level? So I'm still teaching that, still teach John Barth, that you've got to understand it's really your story. It's not the facts of your life. It's about your perspective on your life. How do you see it? And then he helped us a lot on crucibles. I'd done a lot of work on leaders losing their way. But we went through every single chapter over a 4 or 5 day period that week and had time with him. I think his health only allowed us to meet with about 4 hours, but that was fine. That's all we needed. Then we go back to the hotel and think about the ideas and come back the next day to go to another chapter. So we did that, and it was extraordinarily, couldn't have done it without him.
Oh,
I think it's important. He was not editing the book. He was not my editor. He was the, if you will, the kind of idea shaper and developer.
Now,
And I think he enjoyed that because he wanted me to take these ideas and push them further. And yes, we'd talked to 125 leaders, and Peter had gone through their transcripts and picked out, okay, here's someone that said something about their crucible. Here's something they said something about self-awareness. here's someone that said something about their leadership purpose. So you were going to say something. I interrupted you.
Oh, so was the resulting book True North?
Yeah, that was True North.
That was True
Which
North.
became the fundamental book that I've done.
Yeah.
And it's a breakthrough book because it was a whole different way of looking at leadership. I think authentic leadership was the start of the breakthrough. But today, so see, when I came out with authentic leadership, I was really kind of going up a big mountain, because in those days it was the era of Jack Welch and maximizing shareholder value. That was the mantra that everyone had. You've got to maximize shareholder. It was never made any sense to me in Medtronic, and we were all about a mission. And but they didn't like my idea of just writing a book about Medtronic, so that's why. But the idea is never made. And so authentic leadership basically said leadership is not what people are telling you. It's not about your leadership style. We were coaching people on how to have a style. It's like being almost like being an actor in a play. We want you to have a style like this person. Like if you could only emulate Jack Welch's style, and it was true at GE, there were hundreds of people trying to emulate his style. It was very embarrassing, particularly for women and people of color. And it was about charisma. Do you have charisma? And most of the best leaders I know are not charismatic at all. You may look at them ways they're successful. They're not. Satya Nadella is the best leader in the world today at Microsoft, but he's not charismatic. And so it's about the image. You create an image for yourself. That's what Carly Fiorina was doing at Hewlett Packard. And that's what a lot of leaders did. That was the whole Jeff Skilling thing and everything that led to the downfall. So I said, it's not about that at all. It's about integrity. It's about substance, and it's about character. And I remember Warren was very big on the phrase, leadership is character. And I adopted that. And I think it is. I still say that leadership is character. So it's really about character, about integrity, and about substance. So we wanted leaders with those characteristics. So those aren't characteristics, that's just the nature of leaders. And then everything that's followed, everything I've done, there are 3 versions. I went from True North to in 07 to my publisher keeps wanting to renew the book and keep it going, so it sustains itself for a long time, kind of like the leadership challenge. So then Discover Your True North in 2015, and in 2022, the Emerging Leader edition of True North. So that's where I am. And then each one has a workbook, the personal guide to True North, the field book, Discover Your True North, and the latest one, the Emerging Leader edition guide.
The Warren Bennis Leadership Institute is housed at the University of Cincinnati, and all of the 40,000 undergraduates will have access to some kind of leadership program. So we're designing it now. And if we were going to use one of your books, it sounds like this Emerging Leaders workbook and book might be a good fit.
There you are, right there. Yeah, that's the one.
Is that the one you would recommend?
Yeah, and some people don't like it. They want to just use a workbook. I don't really agree with that. I think you want to read the stories in here.
Yeah, you got to read it first.
Yeah, and read that chapter at a time. You don't have to read the whole thing. And I think that's very important to have that experience. So that's fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. That is the definitive book. And I've taken all my ideas. But here we are 20 years later from when I first came out with Authentic Leadership. So we're in a massive generational change. And this is more than just a generational change. This is a whole change in how people think about leadership. And it's taken me a while. Sometimes I was just telling you, head of our foundation, I tend to see where we should go and think we'll get there right away. And it's taken 20 years to get the whole world to convert to authentic leadership. Now, I always get asked about political leaders. And I say, I kind of cop out and say, I haven't studied political leaders. The reality is I don't think my ideas will work if you want to get elected. So let's take I'm not sure most of them are leaders anyway. Okay, they're just people that hold office. No, seriously, they're lawyers and other people. But throughout the leadership field, business, nonprofits, healthcare, media, a little less so, the military, I went out and did 2 programs in Charlotte. I did one in Charlottesville, one in Washington for Mark Milley when he was chief of staff of the United States Army. Of course, then he became chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Great guy. And he said, I want my generals to understand your ideas on leadership. So I said, great, we'll do a seminar. So we did. It was great. And one in Washington, and then he wanted another one for more generals, and one in Charlottesville. And so he had them all come to Charlottesville. So
how was that received with generals?
Oh, I think very well. They've changed. This is not the generals of my era. It's not the Vietnam generals. No, when I worked in the Defense Department, which I did in early in my career in the 60s, it was very different. No, they've changed. And these people are very serious leaders, very serious about leadership. The academies have done breakthrough work. Naval Academy, West Point, and Dana's work at the Air Force Academy, they've done breakthrough work in leadership. They're really good. People don't appreciate that.
Yeah.
How they now think about hierarchical leadership, but empowering people on the battlefield and commander's intent and these things. So no, they've done that. They're good. So the whole world has shifted. But now I think I'm of the view, and technically a silent generation, but I think the baby boomers have left us in the lurch in a lot of very difficult areas. And I think we need Gen X. I included emerging leaders as Gen X. David Gergen does not, by the way, and millennials and Gen Z. Gen Z doesn't know what it is yet, but I think we need to turn things over to this new generation of leaders that are leading different, leading with a sense of purpose, a character, integrity, and values. It's time to make this generation. So the faster this happens, the better. The more we get the baby boomers step aside. No, they're great baby boomers. I mean, Satya Nadella is a baby boomer, and so is, I think Tim Cook is too, but they're great leaders. So the faster we shift to this new generation, the better. I'm not ruling out all baby boomers. There's some great leaders. I mean, Indra Nooyi was a great leader, and Ursula Burns and Anne Mulcahy, and these people are great leaders. So I think the faster we make that shift now, but we need to help young people that are really genuinely confused about what they should do in leadership, because the political messages are so confusing, are so conflicting to them. And that's not going well. And so my whole philosophy today, as of 2024, my resolution for this year is to try to convince leaders in all fields other than politics to ignore the politics and focus on what they can do within their organization. And I go back to Ronald Niebuhr's serenity prayer that was widely adopted by Alcoholics Anonymous, that, Lord, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I can't change who's president of the United States. I can't change what the Israelis and Palestinians are going through. I can't change what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. I can only affect an organization. And I'm actually going one step further and encouraging leaders today to act as a bulwark in their organizations against those external political pressures, not to play the game, not to kowtow. I'll give you an example. 18 months ago, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade with the Dobbs decision. And I can tell you, I don't know of one organization, not one, that has changed its policies on treatment of women who, or their offspring, their daughters, that might have to have a procedure which one would term an abortion. I don't know of one that's changed that. They all have the same policy. You can go anywhere you want in the United States to get the care you need. If you have stage 4 cancer, you need to go to the Mayo Clinic or MD Anderson, you can go there and we'll pay for it. And then they add the phrase, no questions asked, because under HIPAA, we're not going to ask about your health and why you want to go to California with your daughter. That's a violation of your health. So we don't ask that question. So now technically they could get in trouble with down to one company has 20,000 employees in Texas. They could get in trouble with Texas law, but I'm not sure that'll hold up in the Supreme Court. But anyway, the point is, I think the leaders today are very firm. I got to do the right thing for my employees. And the big news in the last 2-3 years, employees have agency. So if you're like the CEO of Disney, former CEO Bob Chapek, who said, I'm never going to deal in any of these public issues, you can't avoid them. He's got a lot of gay employees, and you can't ship 2,000 of them from Burbank, California to Orlando, Florida, and think they're all going to be happy with the way that their children are be treated if they're in a gay family, or even if they're sympathetic to gays, they're not going to be happy. And, he didn't get that. And he tried to change position midstream and he got fired. So it's a long, ugly story. And now we see the challenges in academia where people aren't clear about values. I wrote an article for Elsevier in August of 22 and said basically universities like the University of Cincinnati need to get people talking about values. Yes. You can't impose values on people, but if you think about the students at Cincinnati, they have been in their families their whole life. They're 18 years old. They come to Cincinnati. Maybe some of them live at home, but the most of them live on campus. This is the first time they have to shape who I am and my own values. Yes, I respect my parents, or maybe I don't. Maybe I didn't have a good family situation like a lot of people, or maybe I came from a divorced family, but now I have to shape my own values. University should give people an opportunity to do that instead of just focusing on intellectual. But I can tell you that's not where they are. At Harvard Business School, it's ironic that Claudine Gay got going off a little bit here, but I think I'll make a point. Claudine Gay got fired at Harvard. It started with her not being able to answer the question. Now, if someone ever asked me the question, do you consider advocating in your classroom, Bill, for the genocide of Jews to be in harassment and intimidation of Jewish students? One word, yes. What's your next question? This is not a hard question to answer. If you ask me what the Civil War was about, slavery.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not kid each other. We know what it was about. It was not about states' rights and all that. It was about slavery. The only reason you call it states' rights is because states wanted to have the right to keep slaves. That's the only reason you call it states' rights. And it was about slavery.
Yeah.
And whether Lincoln could say that early on when he didn't have the political support, that's a whole other thing. But, to me, young people need to shape their own values. In all my classes, are all about values. That's what they're about. And I can tell you, we have everyone sign a statement when you come into the class that they will not make any personal attacks on anyone. They will not make any comments that could be considered racist, misogynistic, homophobic, Islamic phobic, you want to throw that in, or attacking someone for their external characteristics, or again, anti-Semitic. If you do that, you have to leave.
Yeah.
And in my executive class, we'll give you your money back and you can leave. But no, we're very clear, and you actually have to sign a statement.
Wow.
Would you mind? I would love to look at that just for a variety of reasons. If you feel comfortable, I don't know if that's
Yeah, I have two statements. Harvard Business School community standards. I recently decided not to force all exec ed participants to sign them, but it's the first thing we go over in every course. If we take a week-long course or an 8-week course, is that statement, and you have to agree to it. Now, then I go into small groups, and then we get into more things like confidentiality and trust. But still, it's the same idea, and I'll be glad to see it. And they didn't go over all the words I just went over because I have to treat you respectfully, Kate. And if I don't, then I can be asked to leave. If you're going to be part of a community, I don't care if it's Cincinnati or Harvard or living in Minneapolis or working for Medtronic, if you're going to be part of a community, then you need to buy into the standards of the community. And I'll tell CEOs and CEOs, but if you have people that are not willing to buy into that, get them out. I don't care how competent they are. Move them out, move them aside, because you're part of a community and they can do more to destroy your community than you'll ever know about. You won't see it, but they will. And so that's really important. So
Did you find that? Did you have situations in your classes over the 20 years where people showed up in that way?
I had one only once. Okay. Now Harvard has about 12 cases a year of violations, and about 6 people are asked to leave the school. These are MBAs. I had only one in an MBA class. It did destroy the class, and I didn't handle it well. We're supposed to end at 2:30, and I adjourned the class and then talked to the woman afterward who had said something inappropriate about Jewish people. And so I didn't throw her out of the class. Maybe I should have. Anyway, she apologized, and I said, go talk to him. But it didn't go well, I can tell you.
If I just tell a story about Dad, a story that he told a lot. I think I mentioned this in another podcast, Betsy. So remind me, Dr. Bion from BU. So when Dad was at MIT, he was working with Bion at BU, and Bion was looking at group dynamics. And he said, never engage. Now, this is a word that I don't know we would use in this context, but he said, never engage the sickest person in the room. And what he meant was there can be one person who is like a black hole for the rest of the class. 99 people are engaged and having a great time, and one person can dictate the outcome for the whole 100. And he was like, just don't engage that person. Just make sure there's a way to kind of, yes, you're here, and we're going to talk about that later. I don't want to say one person is bad. It's not that. But this idea.
No, you shouldn't.
One person's energy or comments or behavior can impact so many in a negative way. That's not fair to anybody else.
So Nitin Noriev, who was our dean, I'm very close to, and became my mentor. He would say I'm his mentor, so we have a mutual admiration society. Taught me that. He taught me early on when I came. because I had a tendency that if somebody didn't like my ideas and started going at them, to get hooked by that person.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, Bill, while you're debating that person about your ideas, we had 90 people in the class, so you got 89 people kind of standing around wondering when we're going to let me express my ideas. So it took me a while to learn that not to, exactly what your father said. Of course,
Yeah, Dad loved Knitton. I think their offices were next door to each other.
They were very close. Yeah.
This is a totally other realm that I wanted to get into about my dad's implant. That was a Medtronic implant, and that's a whole other
right, a defibrillator.
Story. I was just going to ask about Claudine Gay. Do you think that they were set up to fail in that hearing? And do you think there was like a witch hunt for her, or do you think she answered the question from a leadership context? I'm just fascinated. And the sad part is that the three that were at MIT, Penn, and Harvard were all women leaders, which was so proud to get to that place, right? Where we have these amazing women. And I just love your take on that situation. I don't know how this really fits in the podcast, but it's fascinating of our time today.
Well, it's a much more difficult time today to be president of a university or be CEO of a corporation than when I was. Let me say that, because you're expected to deal with all these public issues. And what Claudine Gay did not understand, nor did the other two presidents of major universities, is that when you're in a court of law, what matters are the facts. Medtronic is not going to be found guilty of harming someone unless the facts pertain. It's not what I say as CEO.
Yeah.
When you're in a court of public opinion, facts don't matter. The only thing matter are feelings.
Yeah.
Do you care about me? Do you have empathy for what I'm going through? Do you have compassion? Do you know what it feels like to be a Jewish student on your campus, President Gay? You know how that feels when people are advocating for gender, locking them into, you have any empathy? And if you don't, it's not going to go well. And she was horribly advised by Wilmer Hale, the law firm. The other two women were too. They all had the same thing. And they all said the same thing.
Yes.
And they set themselves up. When you say, well, whether or not advocating for genocide of Jews is a violation, all depends on the context. And so that led Elise Stefaniak, who's not a favorite person of mine, easily to come back and say, well, now, President Gay, under what context do you consider it's okay to advocate for the genocide of Jews on your campus? I mean, okay, she made her look ridiculous.
Yes,
you know, you should know that you're in that kind of forum, and this is made to make you look bad. That's why, if you heard my answer, it was a one-word answer. Yes. Next question.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that these women were not prepared any more than Bob Chapek at Disney was prepared. A lot of people are not prepared. I spent time coaching or mentoring the CEO of Boeing, but that was 6 weeks after the second crash, and he'd made every mistake in the book, so he's listening to his lawyers. And I told him, I just said to you, and he said, well, my lawyers. I said, I don't care about your lawyers. You know, get out there. And I said, your company just killed 346 people. Do you care about human life?
Yeah.
And the family members left behind? He said, Bill, that's all I care about. I said, Dennis, how would anyone know?
Yeah.
You haven't said you're sorry. You haven't apologized. Well, my lawyers, I said, I don't care about your lawyers. Get out there. Medtronic, we always apologize. Get out and apologize. I'm so sorry, Betsy, about what happened to your daughter or your father. I mean, this is terrible. How can we make restitution to you? You know? And so a lot of people don't get this. And we're letting the lawyers run the show.
Absolutely fascinating, though, because it comes back to what you were talking about, right? Over-lawyered, and where is your heart versus empathy?
Where's the humanity? Warren always talked about this? Where's the compassion? Where's the empathy? People are not going to be led by you unless they know you care about them, unless they know, hey, I really care about what you're going through.
Yes.
Okay? Kate, I saw you wiping your eyes earlier. I know this is a very difficult time for you to listen to this. I really care about you. I care about your father. And I know it must still be, there's still a lot of love I can see in your eyes there. I'm just using that role modeling. That's a caring statement, you know, as opposed to some cold legal statement.
I was teaching a class yesterday at the UVA School of Education, and we were talking about McGill because she came from UVA.
She did. I didn't know that.
She was the provost at UVA, and people adored her. And they were shocked. So we talked a little bit because we were talking about communication skills and what happened there. They said, she was a great communicator in any other realm. It's very similar to what you're talking about. I've never heard it said like that, Bill, this differentiation between a court of law and the court of public opinion. It's so clear how you put that. And what we talked about yesterday was who is the audience? She forgot who the audience was. She thought the audience was a bunch of lawyers in Congress with her.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
The audience is the national
us.
TV audience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the audience is the American people. They forgot who their audience was, which is exactly the difference between the court of law and the court of public opinion.
And every time you give a speech, you realize your audience, and everything I say is public, so somebody can tape it, it'll go on and go viral.
Yeah.
The lawyers are sometimes saying free speech allows you to say anything you want. I don't agree with that at all. If you want to be part of a community, I don't care if it's UVA or Harvard or University of Cincinnati. If you want to be part of a community, you have to abide by community standards. Okay? And you can't say things. Dana Bourne, whom you know, she's had to deal with that as dean of the faculty at the Air Force Academy when they started introducing women. And some of the worst offenders were some of the officers there that said totally inappropriate things to these women. And you just can't do that. You have to say, we have a standard, and you cannot do that. Yeah. I mean, frankly, I don't know any Black people that haven't been called the N-word, but man, anyone who's going to do that in a classroom, you have to say can't be part of the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just not acceptable. Okay. And so I don't care about freedom of speech. I'm not taking you to court over freedom of speech, but if you want to be part of the community, you have to abide by community standards.
And that's leadership.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
We had a situation when I came to Harvard Business School in 2004. This is not my classroom, but some MBAs were caught, boys, were caught sitting in the back row making comments about a woman in the front row. About her sexual capabilities. And they were passing notes about this to each other. And they actually had to leave the school. They had to go up to a tribunal or a judiciary board, and they actually had to leave the school. We can't let people do that.
Yeah. That's leadership, though, right? It's like standard.
That is leadership. And you just have to take a stand, period. End of discussion, you know? So you have to have a very clear stand.
Yes.
You know? Am I going to protect the gay people in my organization? Absolutely. I don't have to run ads like Bud Light did, but I'm certainly going to protect all the gay people in my organization against any kind of abuse or inappropriate remarks.
Sometimes I go back to the days in the 90s when I worked for President Clinton. Have we not made any progress in our humanity? Sometimes I feel like we're still dealing with all of these sexual harassment situations in organizations, and why have we not made more progress? Why are we still having these conversations?
We're making progress. Look, there was a time long before these three women stepped up to be president of three major universities. All the presidents, women. I used to make jokes about that because most of the leading universities had a female president. Not all, but most of them did. And they did a great job. Look at Drew Faust at Harvard. She did a fabulous job. She was an incredible president, but they were all over the place. And I remember Larry Summers made his infamous statement about women's brain structure, doesn't allow them to do math and science. And I was on a board with the president of Princeton, who was a molecular biologist, and the president of MIT was, and there are a lot of brilliant people out there. So I think we made great progress with women. We still have ways to go, but we're making great progress. And I thought the gay issue was settled. Okay, I don't care what Clarence Thomas says. The gay issue is settled. The transgender issue is kind of a more difficult issue for a lot of people. And so that's still, we're working our way through that. That's become more difficult. Yes. I can just say that.
Yeah.
I think we still have what people call America's original sin. We still have a problem with Blacks.
Yes.
We still have a religious problem with evangelical Christians in the South that believe that God created Christians to rule the United States, created the United States so Christians could rule it, and a white male supremacy, Christian supremacy idea that's totally flawed. So people haven't come around. That's why Nikki Haley made those unfortunate statements about what's the Civil War about? Slavery. But see, there is this whole thing, the myth of the lost cause, and there's the myth of the corrupted election in 2020. There's nothing corrupt about it. It's settled. The facts are clear, but a lot of people are saying, oh, no, that was stolen election. It's all, so this is all politics. That's why I don't choose to engage in politics anymore, period. But that gets back to Warren's statement, leadership is character.
Yeah.
You have the character to know your values, and universities need to be teaching people values. They
Yeah.
don't need to say what their values are, but they need to cause you to think. University is a time when I really think about, what do I believe? What are my beliefs? Not what are my parents' beliefs? What are my beliefs? And how do I think about that? Because then I go off into the world and then I get hit with all these things, but I've got to have that true north inside me that says, this is my moral compass.
Yes.
Okay. And if this goes wrong, then I've got to step up and say, we made mistakes. We'll take responsibility. Medtronic, yes, this person was harmed by a Medtronic product. We'll take responsibility. We'll acknowledge we did it wrong. We'll apologize and we'll make financial restitution.
Yes.
Can I ask you a little bit about my dad's experience? I remember when my dad, before he got his Medtronic implant, which was a defibrillator and a pacemaker in one thing that was about, ironically, the size of a pack of cigarettes. And
it was then. Now it's about this big, but yeah.
I'm sure. I remember he kept getting smaller and smaller ones, but the first one was like this pack of cigarettes.
It was. No, you're right.
And before he got it, he was on very, very, very heavy medication, probably statins or something. I'm not sure. But I remember being with him in New York City, and it was like he suddenly aged very, very, very suddenly. He was unsteady on his feet. I had to kind of help him across streets. He was maybe in his 70s, but he was so suddenly aged. And he was married to Grace, and Grace was saying, we think it's time to put this implant, but he was afraid of the operation. And he got the implant. And it changed his life. He became young, 10 years off immediately.
Oh, I never heard that story, Kate. Thank you.
The medication was so horrific. Maybe it made him very puffy.
No, they are. The medication's terrible. I know about all those.
Terrible.
Yes.
And suddenly he was himself again. And it was so wonderful. And then,
you just made my day. Thank you.
Oh gosh. And then I'm sure you've heard this story, but I don't know if you both have heard it from me. I know you haven't. At my wedding, the night before my wedding, was the first time.
Yeah.
So you know the story, right? So we were giving toast.
Go ahead.
And it was about 70 people in the room. And my dad and my dear friend, Jamie Raskin, who's in Congress now, at the time he wasn't, he's in Geeks and Geezers, one of Dad's books. So Jamie and my dad were kidding around and trying to figure out who was going to give the first toast. And so Jamie gave my dad the right to give the first toast. And Dad got up to give his toast, and he started singing a song from Guys and Dolls that the old Irish cop sings to his daughter. And his defibrillator went off and he fell backwards. It was so traumatic and dramatic. He like this, he slammed backwards into a piano and to his knees. And then he said, "I'm okay." And he stood up and he slammed again. And then the whole 70 people just ran forward. I was screaming, "Call 911, call 911." And we sat with him and they took him away and in an ambulance. And we were in Buzzards Bay in Massachusetts. And the next morning,
I had heard the details. I had heard about that night.
The next morning, I went to meet him at his bed and breakfast at 10 in the morning. And there he was. And later that day at 4 p.m, he and my mom walked me through the fields of golden hay to get married.
Wow.
And that night, Dad got up to give a toast. And you can imagine the whole audience was like, and he got up to give a toast and he said, "As I was saying," and the whole audience was
That's great.
But that is the first time I ever saw him with that, and it saved his life. It was so awful to watch, but it literally in front of our eyes saved my father's life. It was the most amazing event. Nobody will ever forget it. And then I know that later on, when he was often after a plane ride from LA, that's how he kind of correlated it. When he would go to Harvard, he would give a talk, and it started happening during these talks. And he said at Harvard, and eventually David Gergen started bringing like the EMTs to stand in the back whenever he gave a talk in case, because one of the times you were in the audience with Penny. Do you remember this?
I was, and he got hit twice. And first time he was standing at the podium, there was a famous, a famous scholar named David, it wasn't David Gergen, but anyway, he was giving a talk over lunch at this leadership seminar. And the first time he got hit, he crumpled to the floor and papers went with him. He picks up his paper, stands back up and said, "I'm fine." He keeps doing his talk.
Oh my
10
God.
minutes later, he got hit again. Now, the reality of that, the defibrillator was not actually defective. It was doing its job.
Yeah,
Okay. Because I have to say, he had a very unstable heart.
of course.
And so what I did was that year, I invited him. We have the most important event of the year at Medtronic is called the holiday program. It used to be called the Christmas program. I changed it. There used to be a guy that would read the Gospel of Luke. Anyway, because Medtronic is a very Christian company, and I had to broaden it. I did broaden it. So we'd invite 6 patients to come and talk about theirs. So he came. I invited him as to be our guest to talk about his defibrillator. And he had met that day with all the production employees who made the defibrillator and thanked them personally. And then he came and spoke at that event, and there was no doctor there. And then he talked about this being his friendly ally, and he patted this device, he patted his chest and he said, I have he always had a good joke. He said, "I have Medtronic in my heart. That's why I'm here." And so it was obviously a double entendre to talk about. I'm very grateful to you guys for what you did, but also I physically have your device in my heart that's keeping me alive. So yeah, those are painful things, but hey, he got through them. And to be blunt, the baby David Gergen had the EMTs there, but in the first instance of your wedding, it was unlikely that they could have gotten to him with an external defibrillator in time.
No, it saved his life right in front of our eyes.
He didn't lose mental acuity, or he would have lost a lot of mental acuity. Yeah. Because the odds, if you have a sudden cardiac arrest, this is very different than a heart attack you have because you have plumbing blockage in your heart. If you have sudden cardiac arrest, the odds of survival go down 10% per minute. That hadn't changed. So your odds of survival after 5 minutes are 50%. And you do because you have no oxygen in the brain. So the fact that the defibrillator keeps your heart pumping, what it does, it shocks your heart back to work again. That's what it's doing. It's shocking the heart back to work again, because you have ventricular tachycardia and it goes into ventricular fibrillation, and that's when it's like an electrical short. It's not like a plumbing problem. It's like there's a short in the line and the electricity doesn't work anymore.
Can I tell you how he tells the story about when you were in the audience?
Yeah, please do.
So funny. He said at the time that it went off, his memory, so you remember he was at a podium, how he used to tell the story was that he was quoting from Julius Caesar. And he suddenly was shocked and he was down on the ground. And he said, I looked out into the audience and a third of the people were agape. A third of the people were screaming. And a third of the people were taking notes because they thought it was part of the act.
Really? I hadn't heard the last third.
Yeah, because they thought he was like enacting Julius Caesar's death right in front of them.
Wow. Amazing. See, that's that sense of humor. He had a very rich sense of humor.
Yeah.
And that was one of the wonderful things about Warren. He never took himself too seriously.
No.
You know? And that was one of his wonderful qualities. But he was true right to that last class that I was with him a few months before he died. This next to last class he ever taught. I mean, who else would be teaching at 89 years old? Come on.
I know. He used to say, I think I'm gonna retire at 90. What do you think? And I said, well, see how you feel when you get there.
Wonderful human being. Great loss to the world when he passed away. Because he was as sharp as ever right up to the end.
Hey, Bill, one question for you on authenticity as we think about the curriculum for Cincinnati. When you went down the road of writing your book, I guess 20 years ago now, was it 20?
Yeah. 2003 it came out.
Yeah, authenticity was not the buzzword, right?
Not at all. Not at all.
Put that in there, because now it's authenticity is this word we use all the time.
Well, Webster Merriam Dictionary this year is adopted for 2024. Authenticity is the word of the year. You can check that out.
Wow.
Authenticity is, yeah.
So you've really seen the change from the time your book came out to like.
Oh no, there's a huge change, and that's what I told you. Everyone's come around, and this is the way we. Now the question is, how do we get rid of the toxic leaders in our organizations that are behaving differently? And how do we get rid of the phonies? And that's the challenge they're facing, but at least they recognize they got to do it.
Yes. So thinking about the work that you've done in the curriculum at University of Cincinnati, we would love to talk to you about an aspect of what you teach to use in the curriculum, because that's the goal of this advisory group, is to help us. What is the curriculum that we should be
Well,
teaching?
it's all online. You can have it. I could always find it and send it to you. I created a course in 2005 in Harvard Business School, the year after I arrived, called Authentic Leadership Development. And it's been the most requested, it's an elective second year. It's been the most requested course in Harvard Business School for many, many years. It's not the most taken because it's hard to get people to teach it. Sometimes academics don't want to, because they have to share their own crucibles, their own difficult times, their own life stories, and they don't necessarily want to do that. But anyway, it's been very fundamental, and then it's been an extremely popular executive ed course. I taught it for a while, 3 times a year with one section. Now it's taught twice a year with 2 sections of 70 or 80 or 90 each. So it's very popular in that regard, and it's being used by over 100 universities now, and everyone makes up their own variations, but they do use the book and the workbook. So it's very exciting to me to see this becoming normative.
That
it's
is
taken a while.
great.
I'm very happy about that and the way it's gone. But it all comes out of Warren's original ideas that I took and then tried to push further and use lots of examples. So as you know, all my books are written with lots of examples.
Yes.
Researchers say you don't listen to what people say, you observe them and then make judgments. See, I don't believe in that. I believe, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama that we've worked with, first person research is really important, what you say. And so all I do is I quote from what the person actually says, get their approval, publish it. But then it's a direct quote, so you can hear what they're saying. That is the best part of it. And you'd be shocked at, well, I'm shocked at the kind of things people let me publish that they say. But they're very honest, and that's being real. And so to me, what else can you ask for someone from a leader role? And of course, part of my idea is leaders at all levels, not just the person on top, but you have to have leaders at all levels. So
Exactly.
thank you.
Thank you,
Be
Bill.
well.
Thank you
a lot.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.